Imagine being born into a world where your family's power is so immense that even the law bows before it. In the 16th century, in the heart of Eastern Europe, a woman named Elizabeth Báthory grew up surrounded by castles, noble blood, and shadows of darkness. But the question remains, does noble blood truly make someone immune to human sins? Or is it that very blood that leads to the most terrifying obsessions in history? Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 in Bátor, Kingdom of Hungary, now part of modern Slovakia. She belonged to the Báthory family, one of the most powerful dynasties in Central Europe at the time. Noble blood ran deep in her veins. Her uncle was a prince of Transylvania, her cousin became king of Poland, and other relatives held high positions in the church and government. From a young age, Elizabeth did not live like an ordinary girl. She was educated in politics, economics, and even military strategy, lessons rarely given to women in the 16th century. Yet behind this noble upbringing, there were darker lessons too. Lessons about power, blood, and how such power could make someone feel untouchable. When later accusations surfaced that Elizabeth tortured and killed hundreds of young girls, a major question arose among historians. Why was she able to commit these crimes for years without facing the law? Was it because no one dared challenge a Báthory noble? Or was noble blood the strongest shield of all? Documents from the 17th century show that evidence against Elizabeth appeared long before her arrest. Witnesses spoke up, servants fled, even palace priests grew suspicious. Yet all these reports seemed to vanish in the hands of royal officials. The Báthory family's power was too great to touch. They had influence over courts, the church, and even the royal army. Who would dare challenge a family that controlled half of Transylvania? Here arises another unsolved mystery. Did noble status change the way Elizabeth viewed the lives of ordinary people? Imagine growing up in a world where commoners are merely numbers, and your own life is considered more valuable simply because of your lineage. Could this mindset have fueled Elizabeth's obsession with blood, not just as a symbol of purity, but as a mark of power ordinary people could never possess? Some historians argue that Elizabeth was merely a political victim, brought down because of her family's wealth and influence. Others believe noble blood truly carried a dark side, the urge to play God, deciding who deserved to live and who deserved to die. The story of the Báthory family is only the beginning of this long mystery. Behind the walls of Cachtice Castle, Elizabeth began to reveal a darkness even her own family could not control. What truly happened behind those closed doors? And was her obsession with blood born from power, or from something far darker, something beyond human understanding? Noble blood gave her power, but it may also have been her curse. Throughout history, those who had everything often lost the simplest thing, their humanity. Next, we will step deeper into Elizabeth Báthory's castle, where nighttime screams became secret songs, and every drop of blood told a story never before revealed. We know Elizabeth Báthory was born into a family of immense power and privilege. But what could turn a noblewoman, raised among luxury, knowledge, and refinement, into one of the most prolific female killers in European history? Was her cruelty born from madness, or molded by a noble upbringing that was too perfect and too merciless? From childhood, Elizabeth was raised in an environment ruled by discipline, intellect, and power. She was fluent in Latin, German, and Hungarian, and even capable of debating law and politics with royal officials. Historical biographies from the 17th century mention that she studied etiquette, philosophy, diplomacy, and music, all designed to shape her into the ideal noblewoman. But perfection often demands the sacrifice of one's soul. Inside the castle walls, Elizabeth lived far from the world of commoners, in a society where life and death were matters for the nobility to decide, not the law. She witnessed how lords punished their servants with violence, not as crime, but as a lesson in obedience. For the nobility of the 16th century, power was not just a right, it was a way of life. And perhaps within that belief, the seeds of darkness began to grow. Some historical records claim Elizabeth showed cruel tendencies from a young age. There are accounts saying she tortured servant girls over minor mistakes, even taking pleasure in watching blood flow during animal slaughter. But the real question is, were these stories true, or were they rumors crafted to destroy her reputation after her fall from power? Modern historians have revisited ancient archives and found that many of these claims about her childhood appeared decades after her death, suggesting that some may be products of political manipulation or folklore. Still, one fact remains undeniable. She grew up in a culture steeped in violence. In those days, public punishments, torture, and executions were part of everyday life. And for the aristocracy, witnessing pain wasn't horror, it was a lesson in authority. Imagine growing up in a world detached from reality, where blood and fear were not terrifying, but symbols of control. Could it be that at a young age, Elizabeth began to associate power with pain, and pain with inner satisfaction? Many historical psychologists suggest that the social isolation of the nobility deeply shaped her personality. She had no real friends from the lower classes, and every interaction was wrapped in formality and obedience. In the vast, silent halls of her castle, Elizabeth may have learned a dangerous lesson, that people were not companions, but instruments. Yet, there was one event in her youth often said to have awakened her true darkness: her marriage to Ferenc Nadasdy, a young nobleman from one of Hungary's most feared military families. Ferenc was known as the Devil's Warrior, a soldier who took pride in decorating his family's crest with the blood of his enemies. And here, two worlds collided: the intelligence of a noblewoman and the brutality of a warrior. This union would mark the beginning of a legend, a tale written not with ink, but with blood. Elizabeth Báthory was no ordinary woman. She embodied two sides of human nature: intelligence and savagery, education and corruption, beauty and darkness. But one question still lingers. Was she born a monster, or shaped into one by a world of privilege that killed compassion at its roots? Next, we will step into the era of her marriage, where Elizabeth Báthory began her transformation from a powerful noblewoman into the terrifying legend the world would come to know as the Blood Countess. The year was 1602. In an old castle deep in the Transylvanian mountains, servants whispered in fear. They spoke of screams in the night, of young girls entering the castle never to return. When the sun rose, only silence and the metallic scent of blood lingered in the air. But the question remains: was it all real, Or were these tales merely weapons in a political game to bring down Hungary's most powerful woman? Between 1602 and 1610, Elizabeth Báthory was accused of torturing and killing more than 600 young girls. The victims, according to testimonies, were servants, village girls, and children of minor nobility sent to her castle to learn etiquette. The most famous report came from Paul Thurzo, a high-ranking royal official and a cousin of her husband. When he ordered the investigation, what was found inside Cachtice castle shocked the kingdom. Witnesses reported rooms filled with blood, hidden corpses, and torture devices. Yet, strangely, there were no official autopsies and no surviving physical evidence. Everything we know comes from hearsay. Court documents show over 300 witnesses were interrogated, but most had never seen the murders firsthand. They only heard stories or repeated rumors circulating in nearby villages. Some confessions from servants were obtained under duress. Threats of death were common in extracting truth at the time. So how can we tell which testimonies were genuine and which reflected nothing more than fear? Modern historians like Laszlo Nagy and Kimberly Craft suggest the accusations against Elizabeth may have been politically motivated. Why? After her husband's death, the Báthory family's wealth and power posed a direct threat to King Matthias II, and suspiciously, after Elizabeth's arrest, the crown seized all her possessions. Without a full legal trial, it seemed more important to claim her wealth than to prove guilt. Yet patterns in the witness accounts are hard to ignore. Many described Elizabeth as obsessed with beauty and cleanliness, even believing that bathing in virgin blood could preserve youth. Was this merely a Gothic myth born from local imagination, or a glimpse into the mind of a woman trapped in her own obsession? Some modern medical and psychological studies explain her behavior as aristocratic sadism, where absolute power erodes empathy for suffering. Others propose that Elizabeth suffered from epilepsy or mental disorders caused by childhood trauma and the violent environment of the nobility. In other words, she may not have been a monster, but a product of a social system that shaped her into one. Looking deeper, a larger motive emerges beyond the horror story. After the investigation, Thurzo, her cousin and chief investigator, forbade Elizabeth from appearing in public court. She was never officially tried. She was confined to her own room until her death. Strange, isn't it? If she was truly a cold-blooded murderer, why was she not executed? And if she was innocent, why were all the witnesses tried and hanged? Here, the mystery of Elizabeth Báthory reaches its peak. Did she really kill hundreds of girls? Or was she herself a victim of a power struggle, a woman who knew too much and needed to be silenced forever? When the gates of Cachtice Castle were finally closed forever, Elizabeth sat alone in her stone chamber with no light, no trial, no defense, only the wind and the legend that grew from the whispers of the people, a legend of the Blood Countess. But what if it was all a story built to cover an even greater crime, a crime not committed by one woman, but by a blood-stained system of power from the very beginning? The accusations against Elizabeth Báthory remain a mystery that has haunted history for over 4 centuries. Between fact and fiction, truth and conspiracy, her story endures, not because of blood, but because of questions that have never been answered. In the next episode, we will step into the darkest chapter of her life. Imagine a noblewoman standing in a cold stone chamber. In her hands, a bowl of red blood flows from a young girl's lifeless body. She smiles and slowly pours the blood over herself. Such is the legend of Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess. But the question remains, did these blood-bathing rituals really happen, or were they myths created to destroy her name forever? Stories of Elizabeth's bloodbaths first appeared years after her death, not in official court documents, but in folk records and 18th century horror books. In the 1611 court archives, no witness explicitly claimed that Elizabeth bathed in human blood, yet the legend spread through written accounts and oral tales passed from village to village. According to folklore, one day Elizabeth slapped a servant and blood splashed onto her hands. When the blood dried, her skin supposedly felt smoother and younger. From that moment, the tale says, began a mad obsession, leading her to sacrifice hundreds of girls in the name of eternal beauty. However, historical evidence tells a different story. There are no medical records, physical proof, or witness confessions confirming such horrific rituals. All bloodbath stories come from secondary sources and sensationalist 18th and 19th century writings, especially Gothic European literature, which loved to mix blood, women, and immortality. Some modern historians even call the legend misogynistic propaganda, a way to portray powerful women as demons, especially in an era when educated noblewomen were seen as threats to the patriarchal order. According to Kimberly L. Craft, author of Infamous Lady, The True Story of Countess Elizabeth Báthory, the bloodbath story is likely symbolic, not a literal act, but a representation of Elizabeth's obsession with beauty, perfection, and absolute control over others. In simpler terms, she didn't bathe in blood, but she did play God with other people's lives. If we strip away the horror, the bloodbath ritual carries a deeper message about human obsession with beauty and immortality. In the world of nobility, especially for women, beauty was not just appearance, it was power. Elizabeth lived in a time when a woman's body symbolized status and influence. Could it be that the legend of the bloodbath was born from society's fear of women who refuse to age, submit, or fade from history? We can also see it as a reflection of our modern world. Back then, nobles allegedly bathed in blood for youth. Today, humans undergo surgeries, injections, even genetic experiments to achieve the same goal, to defy age, to defy mortality. Perhaps the Báthory legend is not about a monster, but a warning about the darkest side of human ambition. Yet, some fragments leave historians uneasy. There are reports of bloodstains in the castle's basement, medical notes about missing servants, and testimonies describing Elizabeth's obsession with cleanliness and personal rituals. Could it be that the blood-bathing ritual was not literal, but another form of torture given mystical meaning by the local population? Or did something truly horrifying happen that was too disturbing to record officially? The legend of the bloodbath has turned Elizabeth Báthory into an icon straddling two worlds, history and myth. To some, she is a bloodthirsty monster. To others, a political victim and a symbol of human obsession with eternal beauty. But one thing is certain. In this story, blood is more than the fluid of life. It is a mirror of humanity's deepest fear, the passage of time. Next, we will explore how this legend evolved after Elizabeth's death, how propaganda, folklore, and popular culture transformed her into an eternal horror icon, the Blood Countess. We all want to look young, beautiful, and flawless. But how far would someone go for beauty? 4 centuries ago, a noblewoman feared losing her looks so much that she was rumored to trade her youth for human blood. The real question is, was it truly madness or just a reflection of humanity's timeless obsession? Family records show that Elizabeth Báthory was meticulous about her appearance. She dressed elegantly, used herbal creams and expensive perfumes, and often checked her face in silver mirrors, a luxury only the nobility could afford at the time. In surviving personal letters, there are vague mentions of a fear of aging and time-consuming beauty. Such fears were no trivial matter in 16th century aristocracy. For a powerful woman, beauty was a symbol of status, influence, and control. If her beauty faded, her power could follow. Accounts from servants and witnesses paint a picture of obsession that went beyond normal limits. Elizabeth reportedly hated wrinkles, panicked at minor skin blemishes, and instructed her servants to apply strange concoctions made from animal blood and rare herbs to her face. Modern historians question, was this simply traditional noble self-care or an early sign of a pathological obsession with the body and mortality? Some historical psychologists suggest Elizabeth may have suffered from extreme narcissistic tendencies, where a person can no longer distinguish between self-worth and physical appearance. In a secluded world full of social pressure, obsession with beauty could turn into an addiction to control over the body, over aging, and even over the lives of others. Looking deeper, Elizabeth's obsession with beauty reflects a universal human fear of mortality. She lived in an era where disease, war, and time could take everything in an instant. Clinging to beauty was, in a way, a rebellion against fate. Yet obsession, like a candle burning too brightly, eventually consumes itself. Her story also raises a deeper question. Is true beauty a blessing or a curse? In a society that judged women by their looks, Elizabeth may have been merely a product of noble pressures, trained to be perfect, never allowed to be simply human. Behind her elegant gowns and cold expression, there may have been a fragile soul fighting a single fear, the fear of losing everything as her beauty faded. Some witnesses described her as graceful yet terrifying, her speech calm and intelligent, but in her eyes something dark lingered. Was it a reflection of madness, or just the shadow of a mirror reflecting her deepest fears? Perhaps her strange rituals and extreme behaviors were not mere crimes, but desperate attempts to fight the one thing every human fears most: time, death, and losing control over one's own body. Elizabeth Báthory's obsession with beauty may seem insane to us today, but if we're honest, aren't we still obsessed with the same thing in the modern world? We just swap blood for serums and basements for beauty clinics. Maybe Elizabeth isn't just a dark legend, but a mirror reflecting the darkest parts of ourselves. In the next episode, we'll explore another side of her personality. Was her cruelty truly born from madness, or from political ambition and personal vendettas far more complex than mere vanity? Imagine a kingdom where a single woman's name could shake the power of the nobility. A wealthy, intelligent, and influential countess suddenly accused of murdering hundreds of young girls. The question is, was she truly a monster or merely a pawn in a political game far more dangerous than blood? In the early 1600s, Elizabeth Báthory was no ordinary woman. She inherited one of the most powerful families in Hungary, owning vast lands, fortresses, and a private army. After her husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, died, Elizabeth became a single, extremely wealthy noblewoman. In the feudal system of the time, a powerful woman without a husband was a threat to male nobles hungry for control. She did not only possess wealth, but also political influence and diplomatic ties with the Transylvanian kingdom, a region constantly contested between the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. In short, Elizabeth was more than just a noblewoman. She was a political force. In 1610, the horrific accusations emerged. Hundreds of young girls disappeared, and all evidence pointed to Elizabeth's Cachtice castle. But who started these claims? Historical records point to Count Georgi Thurzo, a high-ranking royal official and distant relative of Elizabeth, tasked by King Matthias II to investigate the case. Ironically, Thurzo had personal motives. He wanted control over the Báthory inheritance and to strengthen his position at court. After a brief investigation, Elizabeth's castle was raided, and her servants were tortured until they confessed that the Countess had indeed killed the girls. Yet, there was not a single independent eyewitness, no official legal documents, and no bodies were ever conclusively found. Modern historians question, how could one woman have killed hundreds without clear physical evidence? Some argued that the accusations were part of a planned political campaign to remove Elizabeth and seize her wealth. After she was sentenced to life imprisonment, all her lands and castles were confiscated by the crown. Coincidence or hidden motives? King Matthias II even avoided repaying the Báthory family's large debts, around 17,000 florins, and the case gave the perfect excuse to erase those obligations. With a single accusation, her political enemies gained two things: wealth and the destruction of the family's reputation. Some records suggest that before the accusations, Elizabeth had refused certain political alliances with the crown. Her rejection offended several officials, and soon after, the horrifying accusations appeared. Coincidence, or proof that Elizabeth was made a scapegoat? There are also theories that the stories of bloodbaths and ritual murders may have been created by the Catholic Church to reinforce moral campaigns against nobles considered too independent and powerful. Stories like these were effective, terrifying, entertaining, and reinforcing the Church's moral control over society. Perhaps the history of Elizabeth Báthory is not just about blood and beauty, but also about the power of narrative. Whoever controls the story controls the legacy. And if the tale of the Blood Countess is propaganda, it might be one of the most successful political campaigns in history. We may never know the full truth, but one thing is certain. When politics and ambition collide, even a woman as clever as Elizabeth Báthory can become a dark legend hiding a far bloodier game of power. Was Elizabeth truly guilty, or simply a victim of history, buried beneath myths and lies? In the next episode, we will examine her mysterious trial, where truth and deception merged into a single historical tragedy. Imagine a noblewoman once worshipped for her power and wealth, now buried alive within her own castle walls, without ever facing a trial. In 1610, the world witnessed the fall of Elizabeth Báthory. But the question that still haunts history is this: was it punishment for her sins, or a conspiracy to silence a powerful woman? On a cold December night in 1610, Count Georgy Thurzo and his men marched toward Cachtice Castle. They carried a royal order from King Matthias II, accusing Elizabeth Báthory of the brutal murders of young girls. When the castle doors were forced open, legend says they discovered a horrifying scene: a girl barely alive, her body covered in wounds, and several others already dead. But here's the catch. Every detail of that night came from Thurzo's own report. No independent witnesses, no official documents from outside the royal court. That night, without a single hearing, Elizabeth was arrested and locked inside her own fortress. This is one of the strangest aspects of early 17th century European history. Elizabeth Báthory, accused of killing hundreds, was never formally tried in court. Her servants were tortured until they confessed, then executed. But the Countess herself received a different fate: life imprisonment without ever standing trial. Why? Historians offer two major theories. The first, her noble status. As a member of the powerful Báthory family, putting her on public trial could have shaken the entire feudal structure. It would drag her family's name through scandal and potentially damage the monarchy itself. The political solution was simple: silence the case quietly, lock her away, erase her from sight, and control the narrative. The second theory, something was being hidden. Perhaps officials realized the accusations weren't as solid as they appeared, or maybe they feared that an open trial would expose deeper political schemes. So instead, Elizabeth was imprisoned without ever being given a chance to defend herself. Elizabeth was confined in one of her own castle towers. Unlike a normal cell, the room was sealed from the outside, with only a small opening for food and air. There, the woman who had once lived in luxury and command spent her final 4 years alone, in silence. Records from castle guards say she never confessed to the crimes. She only wrote long letters filled with bitterness and betrayal. In 1614, she was found lifeless in her cell, lying peacefully, as if surrendering not to guilt, but to time and the cruelty of the world. The strange inconsistencies of her case still puzzle modern historians. If she truly murdered hundreds, where are the mass graves? Why was there never a public trial? And why did every report we have come from one man, Georgy Thurzo, the very person who gained the most from her downfall? After Elizabeth's death, all her lands and fortune passed to the crown. Her name vanished from records, and her story was reshaped into a gruesome legend. A legend perhaps written not in blood, but in politics, ambition, and fear of female power. Elizabeth Báthory died without a trial, but history executed her without mercy. Whether she was a monster or a victim of a system that refused to tolerate a powerful woman, one thing is certain: the truth about the Blood Countess was buried with her within the stone walls of Cachtice Castle. In the next episode, we'll uncover archaeological discoveries and modern historical studies that may reveal who Elizabeth Báthory truly was: a murderer or the greatest victim of propaganda in European history. Centuries have passed since the stone doors of Cachtice Castle were sealed forever. And yet, the name Elizabeth Báthory was never truly buried. She lives on, not as a woman, but as a shadow, a haunting echo in every vampire tale, every story of blood and eternal youth. But the question remains, are we remembering a real woman or a monster born from fear and imagination? Since the 17th century, the story of Elizabeth Báthory has spread across Eastern Europe. Royal records branded her a sadistic murderer, but folklore transformed her into the countess who bathed in blood to preserve her youth. In Hungarian and Slovak folklore, her name became a symbol of the evil woman, the seductress, the witch, the noble demon hiding behind beauty. And yet, other historical accounts, especially those from the Báthory family archives, portray her as something very different, a brilliant, powerful woman destroyed by political conspiracy. Two faces, two narratives, one built on fear, the other on betrayal and loss. Both have survived, and together they created the legend we know today. The farther we move from her lifetime, the blurrier the line between history and myth becomes. By the 18th and 19th centuries, writers began adding sensational details, blood rituals, torture chambers, and horrors never mentioned in original documents. European authors soon merged her story with vampire folklore, and from that fusion came a new title, the Blood Countess, a title that inspired generations of fictional characters, from Bram Stoker's Dracula to countless portrayals in modern films, music, and games. But modern historians discovered something very different. No mass graves, no official court records, and most testimonies were written decades after her death. All of it leaves us with one haunting question. Was Elizabeth truly a killer, or merely a legend born from humanity's fear of powerful women? When we look deeper, the legend of Elizabeth Báthory isn't just about blood and cruelty. It's a reflection of the moral and social mirror of her time. It reveals how a patriarchal society viewed women with power. Intelligence was seen as cunning, ambition as sin, and strength as darkness. Perhaps this story isn't about guilt at all, but about how history turns powerful women into monsters so the world can feel safe again. And maybe the real reason her legend endures is because humanity in every era is drawn to the same two forces, beauty and fear. Elizabeth Báthory had both, and that's why history made her immortal. Today, the ruins of Cachtice Castle still stand in Slovakia, wrapped in fog, silence, and stories that refuse to die. Visitors come not to seek the truth, but to feel the legend, a legend born from uncertainty. We may never know who Elizabeth Báthory truly was, a cold-blooded killer or a woman destroyed by power and politics. But one thing is certain. Each time we whisper the name, the Blood Countess, we're not just talking about history. We're speaking of the timeless power of a story that refuses to end. History may have written only one side of her story, but legend wrote the rest, in blood and imagination. And there, between fact and myth, Elizabeth Báthory still lives, an enigma we may never fully unravel. Because perhaps the real monster is not her, but the way we choose to remember her.